Good afternoon and welcome to the final Trial Talk Live of Season 2. My name is Marianne Lamberlo and I will be your moderator today. With me is Nancy McDonald, who will monitor the questions that you type into the chat, and she will ask our speaker to answer those questions at the end of her talk. Today's speaker is Master Gardener Mary Sherman-Reed. Mary very generously shares her time and her vast horticultural knowledge with other gardeners and with the rest of our Master Gardener team. She is well known on the local garden speaker circuit and is in demand with all the local horticultural societies and garden clubs. Mary is also sharing her love of gardening with her 2 grandchildren to continue the family's gardening tradition. Mary, over to you.
Thank you very much, Marianne, and lovely to be with you today. So today we're talking about wrapping up for the season. So essentially, we're into winter protection. Now, there are all sorts of permutations and combinations of what you can purchase or what you can make. The key is you don't protect for winter just to protect for winter. There's a reason why and how and when and what, and that's what we're going to go over with today. So you can purchase goodies like this little tent, or you can make your own. So this is a combination of homemade and purchased. So on the left, we have a little wicker basket that's being basically retrofitted for a garden. And then we've got some garbage cans. Probably a good idea to have some air circulation in these tubs or garbage cans when they are black, so that there's some air circulation going on underneath the plant that you're protecting. Now, as you walk around the neighborhoods in the wintertime, there's all sorts of art exhibits to be found. Some positive, some not so positive, but it's all beauty in the eye of the beholder. If you are going to protect, it's pretty important that you're doing it for the right reason and in the right way. And we'll talk about that. So the first thing that you want to know about winter protection is if you start with the right plant in the right location, your wrapping needs are going to decrease. So this is a westward facing garden, probably not the best for evergreens, but as they get better established, okay. And as you can see, right next to a sidewalk, once again, evergreens, probably not the best, but if they're salt tolerant, okay. Now, one thing you also want to consider is the zone of the plant and the zone of where you live. In Ottawa, we're in 5A, and we always think it's because it's oh so cold. But really, the 5A means wind as well and snow cover. And we know last year was brutal in terms of lots of wind before we got snow. So those are things to consider, as well as any new plantings. Now, most of the winter wrapping is for evergreens. So the fellow on the left is a yew and easily repairable in the spring if this is what happens. The fellow on the right is a cedar, not so easy to repair. The key to this is don't do any trimming. If you find the brown to be unsightly, just brush it with your hand or your body or whatever, and wait until you see the new buds. On the left, you can already see the new growth coming through. Also on evergreens, we have broadleaf evergreens, things like euonymus and rhodos and the like. So in this situation, you can see that the top portion of that euonymus is pretty unhappy, probably got beaten around above the snow by the wind. Once again, most things are fixable, can probably be trimmed, but it would be better if we protect these little fellows so that we don't have to go through this next year. So the first thing you can do in terms of protection is no protection. Water, water, water. So around September, probably a wise idea to get your watering can out, your hose, or whatever kind of vessel you want to use, and water anything that is broadleaf or an evergreen. Once a week is a good guideline, and it doesn't stop when the hose goes inside. You turn off your outside faucet or the irrigation system is turned off. You need to go out and water these evergreens until the ground is frozen solid, which means when you can no longer dig a hole in your garden or in your grass. Usually a bucket is lots. Let the water pool, let it infiltrate, and then you're done for that week and keep on going. There was 3 or 4 years ago, people were playing golf on Christmas Eve just so they could say they did it. you need to be watering right through. That pumps up the water supply in these leaves and these needles and really lowers the chances of winter burn. Now, if you are going to wrap, there's once again all sorts of permutations and combinations. Once the ground is frozen, if you are going to do, as we were talking about earlier, really wrapping up these things and stringing them and trussing them and everything else, I would not recommend this type of wrapping, but some people do it. The issue becomes if we have a thaw in January, February, you must go out and take this wrapping off so you don't end up with a furnace on your hands, which is basically counteracting what you were intending to do. So we'll look at some other ways of wrapping, but certainly burlap is fine, string is fine. But I always think open is better than closed. We're wrapping evergreens here because of the wind, but it's nice to have some air circulation. So whether you use burlap or whether you use this Arbortex or there's white fabric, doesn't matter, but open is better than closed. Loose is also better than tight. However, there is a happy medium. Clearly, the fellow on the left is going to do okay. The guy on the right didn't do very well at all, and it actually negates the effect of the wrapping because now we've exposed the bottom of this U. Now, what you're going to use, I mentioned a few things, but you don't have to buy things. You might have things in your home. So in this situation, we've got burlap and masking tape. Probably a little tight for my liking. We've got plastic on the bottom. I thought a lot about this plastic and thought, I don't think we want plastic around an evergreen. But I thought, you know what? I wonder if this is because dogs lift their legs on the bottom of this plant. And if that's the case, that makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, I would not recommend plastic because there is no air circulation. The reason why plastic might work for a dog lifting its leg is because any form of fabric or material acts as a wick, which is another reason why you don't want the material or fabric up close and personal to the plant. If there's any form of salt or de-icer, expulsion, let's call it, onto that fabric that is very close to your evergreen, it just gets sucked right onto your plant, which is really, once again, counteracting what you ended up wanting to do. You can also use fabric, as I mentioned. You can use Velcro tape. You can use string. You can use twine. It's all about the reason why you're wrapping. But I believe loose is better than tight. Now, another reason why you might want to be wrapping is to prevent some snow damage. Now, clearly not the best picture, but it gives you a very good idea of what happened. Snow or ice came off the top roof right on top of this cedar. So it's clearly splayed and perhaps does not have the same attractiveness that it used to have. Now, the rule of thumb is if a branch bends less than 45 degrees, it should right itself. With that in mind, it's not going to be overnight. So if you're the kind of person that doesn't like a lot of messiness in your garden, perhaps this is a reason why you want to winter protect as well. How can we keep this guy up and straight so when the ice, the freezing rain, the snow plops on top of it, it doesn't splay, as you can see in this example here? So there's netting. Any kind of netting is fine. This is a plastic netting. It works pretty well. It can be done at any time. Whereas when you wrap up tight, you want to wait until the ground freezes so the little critters don't get in and set up shop there. So the positive to this netting is you can reuse it as long as you make the means of attachment a good way to detach in the spring, and then you can just fold it up and put it in your shed for the following year. Another thing you can do is just plain old twine. And if you're going to do that, nice to use a fabric twine so that in the springtime, snip, 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 and it goes right into your green bin or into your compost. If it is a nylon twine, of course, in that situation, what needs to be done is it needs to go into your garbage. Here's another great example. And the reason why this is wrapped is because of the jets from the snowblower. This mugo pine would get blasted. So it is all wrapped up, and quite effectively, I would say. Now, the fellows on the bottom right, I think it's a fabulous idea, although I think these little boxwoods are really way too tightly wrapped for my liking. It looks like there's strangulation in the midst. What has been used, however, is its Christmas lights or holiday lights or winterlude lights, whatever you want to call them. So instead of tying them up with string or netting or fabric, these folks have put their Christmas lights around, and that works dual purpose, something nice and festive for their garden. And it's also keeping the boxwood nice and tight for the following spring. So you can also build yourself a wooden structure. I find this is really quite the construction project. It's a hydrangea standard that is outside somebody's home, and it is preventing the snow from dropping on the hydrangea, breaking the branches, and that's the end of the nice structure of the hydrangea standard. It works very well. It's important to note that this structure is facing south, so it's all right that it is totally open. If you are perhaps making it some kind of a sandwich board covering like this, but on a much smaller scale, you need to be aware of where the north and the south and the west and the east are, so that you actually have the solid sides of your structure facing northwest. So if we go back to that first slide for a minute, where you might want to have put a sandwich board over those junipers that were really close to the sidewalk, and to get them out of the de-icing component, you would want to make sure that that solid side would be facing the road, because I mentioned it was a western exposure. If you turn the sandwich board structure around and not send the solid sides north and west, you end up making yourself a wind tunnel. So everything you were hoping to accomplish with your little sandwich board was all for naught. Because what ended up happening was you've now got the wind whooshing through there. So some form of a wooden structure is great. You don't have to worry about the wicking that we talked about earlier, and it just does the job nicely. Now, you might be wrapping borderline hardy plants. This is a Japanese maple that is clearly borderline hardy in Ottawa. If you put it in the right place, you might still be able to get it through our winters with some wrapping. So I always like to recommend something like this, is you put the stakes in the ground, for example, on the left, these are actually around a magnolia, before the ground is frozen. And then once the ground is frozen, that's when your wrapping goes around it. Once again, it doesn't matter what kind of material or fabric you want to use, as long as it's going to cut the wind, because that's the reason behind using some kind of wrapping for those tender plants. Now, climbing roses, you can most certainly take a true climber off the trellis, arch the canes, weight the end of the canes down so they don't whip around in the winter wind. That, to my mind, is way too much work, but having a true climbing rose is also way too much work for me. But if you're going to have one, it makes a ton of sense to protect them, because obviously, often the buds for next year's blooms have already formed on a true climber. So what this family has done, I think, is a marvelous idea. What they have done is they've basically made a little sack over the top. There's good air circulation, and it's protecting anything that might whip around on the trellis. Of course, if you have any form of vine, you'd like to make sure it's neatly affixed to the trellis as well. Now, I do see there's one drawback here. Bottom right, you'll see that there's some space between the bottom of the little bag and the soil. It seems to me that bunnies and mice really like the rose family. And of course, roses are part of the rose family, as are fruit trees and service berries. So if this were my rose and I had bunnies in my neighborhood, I would most certainly be putting some kind of caging over the bottom, between the bottom of the bag and the top of the soil. Better safe than sorry. Ah, yes, burning bush and critter damage. Burning bush is another plant that is loved by bunnies. And also, I think that the bunnies must have the inside track on people's budgets, because they also seem to go after the most expensive plants in our garden. Often they're after magnolias and Japanese maple. So you really might want to do something about protecting them from those critters. In terms of what kind of protection, there's lots, but the key that we always have to remember is as the snow goes up, the access point to your plants grow up. The good news on burning bush is these will sprout from the base, so I wouldn't spend a lot of time trying to cover them or wrap them, but I would most certainly do some of the others. So this is kind of a nice caged idea for, I believe this is a magnolia. So you can see that the cage holes are small enough that somebody with a little snout can't stick their nose through and gnaw on the branches or on the trunk. So far enough away that you've got some air circulation, and far enough away that the little teeth don't go through the holes of the cage. Now, you can also see that this is wrapped fairly high, but do remember the whole issue with the level of the snow. So if you have a pretty new plant in your garden, perhaps a new serviceberry, a new fruit tree, not only would you want to cage it, as you can see in this picture, but you actually might want to seal it at the top. So essentially what you would be doing is doing one more layer of that caging and then seal it like a birthday parcel at the top, so that as the snow goes up, the bunnies can't hop up, over, and in. What you will notice if they get at any of your plants is the gnaw marks basically go from high up right down, and that's your indication that they were either eating as the snow was either melting or as it was falling. If you have trees, there are always these tree wraps. They work very well, but do keep in mind we've got the snow level, which always is a moving target. So you can get these at most garden centers, and they work quite nicely. They are basically a spiral, stretchy kind of plastic, so you can weave them over the branches. Not a bad idea to apply a spray as well, or a paint. In the olden days, you could get Scoot. All of these work well. I'm not recommending one ahead of the other, but basically it's a bunny or a deer repellent. Scoot does not seem to be continued anymore, but you might be familiar with that term. Bob X and Plant Skid work too. This is probably a rare occasion when I'm going to say don't follow the directions, which says spray. I like to paint. The reason why I paint is because I'm getting my target dead on. I'm not having any of this smelly stuff dissipate into the atmosphere. But it works well, and you can always paint a second time in the springtime if we have a long spring, because you got to make sure those critters have something else to eat before you release your treasure trees to the new critters. One last kind of snow protection you might want to do for your trees is away from the sun. It is not uncommon on the south side of a tree that you end up with a crack, basically vertical. Usually that happens in the spring, primarily on maples. It's the freeze and thaw cycle. The sap warms up during the day, it freezes at night, and the bark just cannot cope, and you end up with a split. It is not a death sentence. It's an ugly. So if you want to avoid doing that, you can wrap with fabric. You can paint whitewash or the equivalent. You can even take a plank and tie it on. Make sure it's a soft tie so you don't scratch your tree. This works very well. And the last little group that I want to tell you about is the shallow-rooted perennials. So things like coral bells, hair clips, that kind of thing, lady's mantle, especially when they are planted next to somewhere that might melt pretty early in the springtime. So near something concrete or stone, the snow melts early. The little plants think spring is here. They wake up. they start to grow, their little roots even get heaved out of the ground with the freeze and thaw cycle, and that's the end of that. So what you can do is take some mulch, and if you have not mulched your gardens, you can take compost or soil and basically dump it right on top of these plants. I always recommend going with mulch if your garden is mulched, so that in the spring you just whoosh it off and it's already there. If you haven't, you might as well use compost or soil, because once again, you're not disposing of it, you're using it. You might want to do that on first-year plants as well, because their little root system might not be terribly well established for the winter or for their first winter. And last but not least, we have roses. So right below the green label, you will see the graft on this rose. We can't be certain that our Old Explorer roses and modern roses are always grown on their own roots anymore. Not necessarily the case, as the growers' rights have now been sold to other breeders. I'm not saying that's bad or good. I'm just saying there might be a graft. So if the graft, that bobbly thing, let me use my newfangled pointer, so it's right here. If that is not covered by soil in your garden, you'll want to hill it up. Once again, you're waiting until the ground is frozen. So the soil or the mulch comes into your house. Once the ground is frozen, you go out and you dump it on top. This is a perfect example of why you want to wait till the ground is frozen, because if the mulch is soft, the mice move in, they set up shop, they wake up in the spring, and guess where breakfast is? Right at the ready. So just a little word about this mulching, whether it's those new perennials, the ones that heave, or the roses. The reason why you're doing this is you're trying to keep your plant cold. These are not blankets. These are not tucking them in. This is, you want to keep them cold. So any freeze or thaw cycle, they stay frozen right throughout, and they'll be all set to charm you next spring. I'd be happy to answer whatever questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Mary. Lots of information for us. So I have a couple of questions to start with. So this first one is about dahlia tubers. Just a sec, I'll get back. From Karen. Hello, last year all my dahlia tubers died and I cried. They rotted. I started again and have dug up tubers. They look great. Really nervous about storing. Good advice needed.
Karen, thanks for the question. First of all, plants are really forgiving. It is too bad you lost them all, but really, it's great that you're going to try it again. So the first thing you want to do now that you've dug them out is you want to make sure you dry them out. So I always suggest, once you've cut off the foliage, you turn them upside down on a piece of newspaper for a few days to make sure any residual moisture is out of them. You'll see on the internet that there's a multitude of different storage ways. And as far as materials go, you can use peat moss, you can use vermiculite, you can use this, you can use that. That's fine if it's readily available to you. If it is not, I would find myself a box. Once I've labeled all of these dahlias, so you know who's who and the colors, and those tubers are so big that you can write right on them who they are. Then in this box, cardboard is best, but if you only have plastic, you only have plastic. Make sure there's some kind of air circulation. That's why cardboard is better. Then take some old newspapers, scrunch them into loose balls, and throw them in the bottom of this container. Then you put your dahlias in. Then you put some more scrunched up newspaper balls on top. You tuck this box into the coolest place in your home, not where it's freezing. Dark is good, but not imperative, seeing as you've already got them covered with some newspaper, and then check on them. So once a month, take a little peek. If you find that the newspaper is a bit moist, that's your first indication that you might have some rot. So take the newspaper out, take your tubers out, replace the newspaper with freshly scrunched up in the base, tubers go back in, then on top some more scrunched up, and you're done. Check it again in a month, and if all's well, that's great. If they're all dried up, we've got the reverse problem. It's way too dry an environment for them. Just get a spritzer bottle and give them a little spray. Make sure you rotate them so the spray is all over them, and then put them back for the next month of their sleep.
Thank you, Mary. This one is from Eileen. What do you recommend for Rose of Sharon?
Well, Eileen, you're pretty brave to have a Rose of Sharon in Ottawa because they are very, very borderline hardy. That being said, there's some marvelous ones in the Ottawa area, nice and sheltered. So obviously almost in a microclimate. So if yours is pretty exposed, I think wrapping is the name of the game for you. And I would do it a la magnolia or a la Japanese maple. So I would get my stakes into the ground sooner versus later. I see it's going to be -10 over the weekend at night. Let's hope that's wrong. And then once the ground is frozen, I would get my burlap, my Arbortex, whatever I'm going to use as the fabric around the outside. In the situation of a Rose of Sharon, I would probably put some kind of insulation in that column that you've made. I think leaves would be just great. If you want them in smaller portions, you can always take your weed whacker into a waste bag and then make them into smaller portions and then just dump them into that column you have made. But we're back to once the ground is frozen. So if you're a little pressed for time, you could always put the wrapping around first, but certainly not the insulation because that is an advertisement for the mice.
Okay, from Kevin, when is the best time to put up protection from deer, spring or all winter?
Well, that's a good one, Kevin, because really the deer tend to visit almost 365 days of the year. So it really depends on what they're eating. So I think it's kind of a custom-made approach for you. I think you need to size up when the most damage is done, and then you need to have the preemptive strike. So if most of the damage is in the winter, then you would go the fall. If most of the damage is in the spring, you could actually do late winter, but that perhaps isn't as pleasant for you to do the work. The problem with doing deer coverage too early is sometimes they get used to whatever the protection is, and then it doesn't do the job. So you want the timing as close as possible as to when the deer are going to do their damage.
Okay, and from Cynthia, was the sandwich structure to face northwest?
Thanks for asking that, because perhaps I didn't clarify that as well as I should. So you want the solid portions of the sandwich board facing northwest, so that when the northwest wind comes, it hits the solid side of your sandwich board. It is not going through the middle of your sandwich board and going whoosh right against your plant.
Okay.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, Kevin has asked, I have a honeysuckle vine growing in a pot. Any tips for best chance of survival?
Kevin, I'm assuming that this is a pot above ground and that you're in the Ottawa area. If the pot is not 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter, what I would recommend is you sink it in the ground wherever you can. This is not a permanent location. It could be in your veggie patch, and do it sooner versus later so you can dig the hole. So the whole pot, kit and caboodle goes into the ground, and there it sits till next spring. You then take it back out and it goes to where it should be. If it is in a pretty pot and you don't want to put the pretty pot in the ground, then I would just lift the whole root ball and do what's called heeling it in, which means you basically are plopping it in your garden plot, not in a pretty manner. All you want is no air pockets, and just tuck them in for the winter, maybe give them one drink before winter, and then it's done.
We actually have about 10 other questions, so I know we're running out of time, but I know Marianne will tell you we can send those to our email helpline.
Okay, thank you, Mary and Nancy. This has been the final Trowel Talk Live in our second season. Remember that all of these presentations are available on our YouTube channel. Master Gardener still operates our email help desk, and you can find us on Facebook also for answers to all your gardening questions. And links to all 3 of these venues are in the Trowel Talk Live email that you received each week. Thank you for attending today, and enjoy your winter gardening.